Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. The Indian telecom sector is celebrating 25 years. It's often held up as the poster child of a post-reform India, of a post-liberalized India. Joining us today is a man who spent 14 years as part of the telecom industry as a participant, and today as an observer. He's writing about what needs to be done to take this industry forward. Joining us today is the Rajya Sabha MP R Chandrasekhar. Rajiv, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. As I said, for 14 years, you were an active participant. And today, as an observer, when you look at the Indian telecom sector and you look at this story and how it's played out over the last 25 years, the highs and lows, the intrigues, the twists and turns, drama, squabbling, how would you assess how this story is played out?
No, look, I think at a very fundamental, basic level, when the Narasimha Rao government in 1993 signed those early licenses, the private cellular licenses, the issue in 1993 really was about giving universal connectivity and making sure that the phenomenon of waiting lists and tatkal lists and trunk calls and lightning calls and expensive calls was in some sense addressed. So in a lot of ways, from 1 lakh mobile phones in, let's say, 1995 to come to a situation where we are 110 crores of mobile phones around the country, the consumers' objectives have been met, the connectivity objectives have been met, and I think the fact that all of this has been done on the back of purely private capital and private entrepreneurship makes telecom over the last 25 years one of the most shining examples of the post-reform industry and entrepreneurship.
You know, Rajiv, since you talk about how this is a sector that has benefited and grown on account of private capital and private entrepreneurship, I want to talk to you about where we find ourselves today and the state of the telecom sector, in specific the financial health of the telecom sector. Cumulative debt of anywhere between 4.5 lakh crores to 7.5 lakh crores. That, of course, if you account for the deferred payment of spectrum, etc. Now, you know, SOS after SOS going out from the telecom industry to government seeking urgent intervention. Do you see parallels to what we're seeing today in the Indian telecom sector to what perhaps we saw in 1999 when, again, there was an SOS to the NDA government saying, look, we cannot pay the annual license fee, and then the decision to move to rev share?
No, look, I think, Shereen, we have to understand two things. One is that 25 years on, I think it is time for us to pause and look at creating a new policy framework that addresses many things. I think the debate and the narrative in recent days has been dominated by the so-called debt crisis in the telecom sector, but there are other fundamental issues that we have to grow up with, which is technology, which is the issue of consumer rights, issue of competition. I'll answer that.
I'll come to consumer rights, but let's address the debt crisis. The fear is that is telecom now the new steel? You know, we've seen the exposure of steel companies, the NPAs of the steel companies, and what it's done to the Indian banking sector. The worry is that could telecom, in that sense, be the new steel? Would you agree?
No, so I think, look, I think there is a classic phenomenon between 2010 and 2015 of industry across the board getting caught up in hubris and over-leveraging themselves. This is not unique to telecom. This is true for power, this is true for steel, this is true for highways, and this is true also in some cases in telecom. Now, the point is, I think the government is looking at NPAs and the debt crisis. They cannot afford to look at it and should not look at it in any unique way for telecom. This is an issue that is being addressed by the insolvency law, what the RBI is doing to companies that are indebted and are not able to service their debt. And I think the key here is to ensure that for the orderly growth of the telecom sector, if a telecom company finds itself in a situation where it has got debt that it cannot service, then the creditors must step in and apply the same insolvency principles that you would apply to steel or highways or power.
Okay.
So to ask for a sweetheart deal, which is why I kind of disagree with the approach of some of the telecom operators, to ask for a sweetheart deal in the face of an impending debt crisis is really good, is about going down a road where moral hazard and all other questions will be raised about preferential treatment to a sector when the Parliament has already passed these laws of insolvency and bankruptcy.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that let the insolvency and bankruptcy code, let banks address this situation. You believe that the government should not intervene, because let's just take a look at some of the demands that they're making. You know, whether it's lowering of the license fee, it's restructuring of the deferred payment for spectrum, etc. You believe that there is no legitimate cause for the government to look at any of these demands?
Shereen, the rules of the game post-insolvency have changed completely. The equity shareholders are responsible completely for the state of the financial health of the companies that they are managing. If there is a case that the company cannot service its debt, the creditors step into the role of an equity shareholder, and the equity shareholders will have to take a haircut or be replaced. That is the fundamental tenet of insolvency. That is the fundamental tenet of bankruptcy all over the world. To argue for a bailout package, in my opinion, in this day and age, 25 years after Telecom was started, and we are very, very far away from the days of 1999, where there was regulatory uncertainty, there were disputes between government and telecom operators. This is now a situation where companies are arguing their bad judgments have to be bailed out by the taxpayers of the country, and that is never going to fly. It is never going to fly in Parliament, it is never going to fly with Reserve Bank of India, and it's never going to fly with the banks.
Okay, so, you know, there is an IMG that's looking into this matter, an IMG that's been set up by the government to address some of these issues. But Rajiv Chandrasekhar, let me move away from debt and the current inflection point that the industry finds itself to talk about some of the larger issues. And you talked about how the government now needs to introspect and reimagine and bring out an altogether new telecom policy that's much more futuristic and addresses the challenges of the future. You believe that the 1999 telecom policy was the last telecom policy to, in a sense, be proud of, because you don't think very much of the 2012 telecom policy. If I were to ask you to prioritize what should be the pillars of this new reimagined telecom policy, what would those be?
No, so I think the reason I said NTP 99 was the last really significant policy is because it really brought structural reforms into the sector. It brought competition, it dismantled the duopoly and brought in 4 operators per market. It strengthened the telecom regulator. It talked about technology, which was current for 1999. When you now fast forward to 2017-18, 18 years is, as I say in my letter, in internet time is centuries. And things have changed, technology has moved, consumer expectations and the world, the ecosystem of technology has dramatically changed. So we, I think, need to look at all of those pillars. We need to look at how to address emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, the IoT space. We need to, for example, squarely address this issue of consumer rights. Whether it is privacy, whether it is quality of service. The old regulatory TRA Act did not give enough powers to the regulator to enforce quality of service, to enforce issues that are to do with consumer rights.
Okay, on the issue of consumer rights, Rajiv, let me interrupt you, because you write in your letter to the Prime Minister that the government must legally enshrine consumer rights, which is consistent with, for instance, what they've tried to do with the RERA, the real estate regulator. So are you suggesting that the TRAI Act be amended, or are you suggesting that a RERA-like body be set up by the government to look at consumer rights for the telecom sector?
No, Shereen, I am saying that we need to start a discussion about how the 1.1 billion consumers of India, the digital Indians, if you want to call them that, what rights do they have enshrined in law? That law could be the TRA Act, it could be a separate privacy law, it could be another law, I don't know. I'm not proposing a solution. I am proposing that we start a discussion around the fact that consumers, and we have now 110 crore consumers, who are reasonably dissatisfied at times about quality of service, call drops, privacy, and there is really no solution or no grievance addressal mechanism where telecom operators or ISPs can be held accountable for what consumers find are wrong to them. So I think the conversation about how to enshrine consumer rights, how to address futuristic technologies, how to address competition, how to address sustainable competition, how to address investment. These are all things that we need to look for going forward for the next decade. 2018 to 2028, in my opinion, can be the decade when, given a good, progressive, pragmatic, futuristic telecom framework, we can really, really transform and get to being not just an economic superpower, but really a technology, ICT superpower in the world. Because we have the numbers, we have the population, we have the consumers, and we have the technology providers to put together with an overarching policy framework to take us to becoming, the ICT hub of the world.
In this aspiration of becoming the ICT hub of the world, Rajiv, you also talk about the need to review the 24-year-old license regime. What is it that you would like changed? What do you believe is the need of the hour today when it comes to the license regime?
No, look, I think, Shereen, it's quite, I don't have to be a genius to say that those licenses were created at a time when the world knew and the DOT knew, and their world view of telecom was restricted to fixed line licenses and cellular licenses. You know that in the last 18 years, the world has changed. There is really no need for licensing anymore. If you're an ISP with the kind of technology that we have today, you can deliver all kinds of products and services to the consumer, which does not require licensing of the kind that we envisaged in 1999. Licensing in 1999 was about giving a franchise. Today, you don't need that. What you need is spectrum, and essentially a regulatory framework that allows an operator to innovate and deliver anything that you can with that kind of bandwidth and the physical infrastructure. So I think we have to leave the old world of licensing the way we saw it in 1999, which is a license to conduct a business in fixed services, or a license to conduct a fixed business, to saying, here is a registration, here is a spectrum that you can bid for, and whether you want to deliver voice, whether you want to deliver video, whether you want to deliver whatever, it's up to you, subject to a regulatory standard that you will have to meet. So I think we will have to necessarily move away from a 99 type framework of licenses.
On that note, it is time for us to take a break, but when we return, we continue our conversation with Rajya Sabha MP Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who's written a letter to the Prime Minister asking the government to reimagine India's telecom policy.